Hey everybody, it's Don. On this episode of The Naturalist, we're in rural Champaign County, Ohio, to explore some glacial landforms at the Siegenthaler-Kaestner Esker State Nature Preserve. So let's go. When you visit this preserve, which is a fairly small preserve, I can see it's not real heavily visited. There's just a grass parking area, essentially, and our typical signage introducing you to the preserve. And again, this preserve focuses on glacial history. And on our walk today, it's about a 2-mile walk out and back. There's a little bit of a T section to it. We'll be able to view several different glacial features. Most prominently will be an esker, but we should also be able to see a kettle pond and cames while we're out there. And of course, in this whole area, there are parts of the land that is glacial outwash and till plain and all that sort of stuff. Okay, we had several glaciers hit Ohio most recently about 15,000 years ago. And we're going to take a walk proceeding in that direction into the wooded area and on top of an esker and just see what we see along the way. As we make our approach toward where the esker is formerly located, you see this is just a grass trail. And we're smack dab in the center of farmland in Champaign County. And yeah, it's heavily impacted by humans, but boy, it has kind of a remoteness of its own. The houses, the developments are widely scattered, and this preserve, as I can see, is not heavily used. The trail is simply a grass trail, and I can see it's not beaten down very much. So this is an interesting little getaway in this county, which has at least 4 gems, by the way. I've visited one with you so far, and that would be Davy Woods, which I'll get back to again. We're at this one now, and we'll also hit Cedar Bog at some point, very soon, and Kaiser Lake State Park. Okay, so there are 4 really high-quality natural gems in this county, along with some other things that are interesting to see. Along the walk here, by the way, one of the trees that seems to be lining this whole walk are hackberries, okay? And I think I introduced hackberry at one point in one of our walks that I called hurtberry, because it's well known for these really sharp, stiff extensions on its bark that are, you know, if you were to run into that with your face, that would hurt. Okay, so this whole walk initially here is lined by hackberries and a few black walnuts, as I can see. All right, so I'll just skirt along here for a bit, and I'll be back with you when we start to get into the chief highlights of this preserve. On so many of our walks, we've encountered this non-native invasive shrub, commonly known as bush honeysuckle or emmer honeysuckle, Linicera Mackii. And whenever you see a sea of green out there, these small shrubs used just in Ohio, you can almost assume there's quite a bit of this stuff in it, in the mixture. But in this spot, I'm noticing a native relative, okay, that is similar in appearance, but it belongs here, okay? It's a native. And that's this shrub down here. This is called coralberry. Okay, that's Symphoriocarpus orbiculatus. And if you look at those stems with the opposite leaves, you can see the similarity it has to its invasive relative there, opposite leaves. But emmer is sharply pointed with drip tips, and these have much more oval, ovate leaves. This makes a nice flower and some attractive red fruits in the fall. I'm not seeing any developing fruits yet. In fact, I'm not quite sure whether the coralberry has flowered at this point or not. But there's a real nice patch of coralberry here. Okay, one of our native competitors for the space that amber honeysuckle has been dominating or does dominate. All right, so that's a nice little find in this spot. So far, we've skirted along a border between active farm fields. There's a woodlot in front of us, kind of a second growth woodlot. Pretty diverse, actually. Black cherries, black walnuts, oaks, hickories, ashes, sugar maples, and so forth. But birds are really busy today. This GoPro's not ideal for capturing birds on camera at any distance. But I think what I'll do is I'll pause and be quiet for a while and just take a listen to what I'm hearing as I walk on this trip today. Okay, that's pretty cool, I think. I'm hearing various wrens, sparrows, red-winged blackbirds, catbirds. I think I heard a hawk in the distance earlier. Just an abundance of birds. So if you like birds, this is a good spot to visit. Nice and open and easy to see things as well. Okay, I can see now that we are approaching the Esker itself, which is one of the key features of this preserve. As you can see, I'm kind of in a lower flat area here. Then there's a rise above me, okay, which you can see stretching along, bordered by this fence and the trail itself. So this is where the trail will tee. And that's an Esker. That raised ribbon of land is an Esker. And what an Esker is basically evidence of the bottom of a glacial stream channel that as ice was melting, this would have been a stream or a small river of meltwater that flowed through the glacier as it was melting. And the large sediments, the rocks, the heavy sediments would have dropped out of that stream as it traveled often under and around and between the glaciers. And so, although people are used to thinking of stream valleys or river valleys, here you're left with a humped remnant of the stream floor, okay, where the sediments dropped out of the ice, and then there would have been ice bordering the Esker on either side, so that was a flowing stream dropping out heavy sediments, and this is what's left behind then when everything melts and goes away. Okay, so it's kind of like a reverse stream valley is one way you can think about an Esker. And so one of the key features when you visit this preserve is this Esker that we're going to walk along and then get up on top of, and then see what we can see on top of it. Okay, so let's do that. All right, in this part of the preserve, I'm still bordering the base of the Esker to my right. But into my left, I can see this is a wetland area. There goes a Baltimore oriole. And a lot of the grass that you're seeing in front of me is reed canary grass. That's a non-native grass that we brought here intentionally, but it really likes moist wetland soils. So that's really dominating that spot. Across what is apparently probably the main stream that runs through there, I see willows appearing to be black willow from here. Okay, willows are another tree that's associated with wet soils, stream sides of rivers. And we have a variety of vegetation. We've got some remnant ashes in the area. We have hickories. Been seeing bitternut hickory And elms, American and slippery elms. I'll try to point one of those out up close. Elms still do exist in the wild, despite Dutch elm disease. And then here's a patch that has a lot of sumac in it. I'm seeing that smaller shrub, small tree you're seeing there. From here, it looks to be staghorn sumac with a few ash trees rising out of it. Okay, so that's a little bit about the vegetation on the walk so far. Actually, here's an elm tree. This is an American elm. Okay, let's see. So elms are distinguished by uneven leaf bases, and American elms are smooth on top, or smooth, where slippery elms are very sort of rough and fuzzy. And so this is an American elm. It's relatively smooth. There's a little bit of roughness to it, the top in particular, but the bottom is basically completely smooth to my touch. And so there's the size of the tree. American elms, again, have succumbed in large part to a disease called Dutch elm disease. And but they will grow for quite some time until they finally get stricken by the disease that will ultimately kill them. So finding a very large American elm is still a treat to see, but there are a lot of smaller American elms out there still. Here's one that's a little bit larger in front of us, about 6 inches in diameter. But once you see them get to be 1 foot to 2 feet in diameter, or more, or bigger, that's a special tree. You should see it before it succumbs in general. Seeing lots of butterflies out here as well. And we'll just keep moving. Just down the trail from the small American elm I used to talk about elms is a pretty substantial one. I should have used this to do my ID for you. That's about a 2 foot diameter tree there, in really nice health. Beautiful canopy. Looks to be completely healthy to me. No sign of Dutch elm disease at all. And just to remind you what leaves on an American elm look like, the leaves of an American elm are doubly serrate. Okay, so they're kind of doubly toothed. Nice straight secondary veins from the lateral veins straight out to the leaf margin. They are relatively smooth. They can have a little bit of roughness to the upper surface, but the bottom is smooth. That's in contrast to, say, a slippery elm, which has a very rough leaf and kind of a more roundish leaf. But they also have these uneven leaf bases. If you see the base of the leaves there, it's uneven. It's lower on one side of the petiole than the other. So that's a key trait to identify elms in general and relatives. But that's a quite substantial American elm, a beautiful specimen. Really nice to see. All right, at this spot, we're going to take a walk and start to head up on top of the Esker. I guess I'll just keep this running while we do that. So these are mowed trails, of course. I don't know how often they're mowed. Looks like they haven't been mowed lately. Here's a nice groundhog burrow. Okay, this harkens back to my episode on Punxsutawney Phil. And this one has really done some geology work for us. It's done an excavation, and all of these rocks that have been revealed here would have been flowing in a glacial river that melted and deposited all these things underneath the ice as the glaciers melted and retreated. So all that material that you're seeing there was deposited here in this Esker by glacial rivers. Okay, and it took a groundhog to excavate that for us. Most of that would be limestone. You can see how rounded the rocks are in general, because obviously this was tumbling through a glacial river, and everything gets rounded when it's in a tumbler. I'm seeing a chunk of granite right there. I've talked about how granite is a glacial relic, so this would have come from parts much farther north from where we are, and parts of what would be Michigan or Canada now. Okay, so that's remnants of materials brought here from far north, but the rest would have been potentially, you know, Ohio native materials. Here's another chunk of, looks to be a chunk of granite. Okay, but pretty cool. So that groundhog did some work to haul all of those rocks out of there just to show us on our little walk today. So let's proceed. There's just a little rise. I guess this rise is probably about, 20 feet, 25 feet, maybe above where I was just walking. Maybe a little bit more, 30 at most. Okay, and so if you can see now, that's the part we walked where I was talking about reed canary grass. And so we're just basically on this strip of high land here that is an ancient stream or river course that came through here and left all this behind. All right, and so in this patch, I see some really nice trees. There's a really large, looks to be a pignut hickory based on that bark. All right, and over here we have some large hackberries. There's a hackberry 20 feet in front of us there. I saw some bitternut hickories. That looks to be another, I believe another pignut. The one in the distance, based on bark texture, a much finer, tighter bark, would be bitternut hickory. There's another one to our left over there. All right. I see a stand of bur oaks. Okay, all of these smaller trees to our left right here are bur oaks, which I've pointed out several times in the past. And I believe they're probably offspring of this mom right here. This is a nice sizable bur oak leaning from the top of the Esker. Okay, I actually have my tape. I could get a measurement on that, although I'm seeing a lot of poison ivy. A lot of leaves of 3, let it be, going on that tree. So I'm not going to venture into that mess today, but that's a pretty substantial tree. Oh, it's probably about a 3.5, 4 foot diameter tree, I would say. Leafing out nicely. And that's a bur oak. I think based on some pictures I had seen, it's probably the biggest tree in the preserve. Okay, that's a beauty. So this is a pretty cool spot. Some more elms. I'm here on a really comfortable day. It's about 75 degrees, I think, heading on to 80 degrees. I should say it's I believe it's May 19th, 2024. And it's just a nice day to be here. The mosquitoes are starting to pick it up now as well. There's a nice oak over there too. I believe it's a northern red, okay, without getting close to those leaves. But I will check that one out closer. It has an interesting bark for a northern red. It could be one of the close relatives. This is probably the high point on the Esker, I would guess, right here. Everything's lush and green in the throes of spring growth. Some of the leaves at this point are fully expanded and mature. Others are still growing and expanding. You can often see the difference in those two classes of leaves by their color. Older, fully expanded, mature leaves tend to be darker green. Younger, still growing leaves tend to be lighter green as they mature. Here's a beautiful, what do we have here? That could be a shellbark hickory, possibly. All right, I'll probably come back and try to ID that one more carefully as well. With those that shaggy bark that is not quite as shaggy as a shagbark hickory. And given its location, it's possible that's a shellbark. And if it is, I'll confirm that and talk about it. All right, so let's just continue. At some point, we're able to view Kames and the Kettle Pond from here. And so, oh, here's a huge hickory. Wow. That's a huge hickory. Again, I think that has a disease on it. It's called smooth patch. That's smoothed out the look of its lower bark. It's a fungal disease, a fungus that basically eats the outer bark of a tree. It's not a tree pathogen, supposedly, so it won't kill the tree, but it does sort of deform and exfoliate the outer bark of a tree. So that I can see that the lower 15 feet of that tree is affected by that smooth patch disease. As you can see, it's a little more textured as you go up. But I think that's a bitter nut based on the tightness of the bark and the narrowness of the leaflets on these compound leaves. But boy, that's a big one. That one could rival a state champ. I'm going to try to get a measurement on that at some point today while I'm here. Just a beautiful spot. Again, you pick your right times and right places, you can have these things all to yourself. Gosh, there's a huge pignut hickory to my left over here. Ah, these are big trees. Beautiful. Okay, see the thickness of the texture, the much more textured bark there. Oh, I realize I'm not alone. Here are my companions today. Some steers. They're all huddled under a tree, getting some shade at the moment. They're all black and brown. Not sure what they might be. Could be some Angus over there. But you know, when you're a black furred animal like that, I have a black cat at home, and when you carry him outside and put him in the sun, he heats up in an instant. So a nice sunny day like it's turned out to be today, those things, they heat up pretty quickly this time of day. It's about 1:30. So they're catching some shade under that small tree over there. Okay, so this would all be pastured. They're roaming around in this pasture. If you look at the color of that soil though, that dark black soil, that's just a path of where they've been walking. That color is an indication of hydric soil. Soil that has a high organic matter and is evidence of what would have been wetland soils. Okay, the bottom of wetlands often has this black hydric soil. It's like that. It has such a high organic content because during its formation, that kind of place has low oxygen concentrations, and that inhibits the respiration of that organic material. Okay, so it accumulates and the soil ends up being very dark, black, and rich. And it ends up, once you dry it out and farm it, it's very productive, nutrient-dense agricultural soil. So a lot of these kinds of fields would have been tiled to drain them. I can see that this area probably at one point was all wetland. This would have all been wetland. It's probably tiled and drained, so it can be used, in this case, pasture, and other parts for corn and things like that. Okay, so let me just proceed in this direction. I'm going to try to get my bearings to see if we can see the Kettle Pond and the Kames. So just to preface that, Kames they're like Eskers without the long sinuous movement as evidenced as indicated as a stream flow, former stream flow. They tend to be like just spots where deposits were dropped down in some sort of hole in the ice or crevice or spot that melted out earlier, where kind of like a big chunk of sediments were dropped out. And they're like mounds, essentially. Okay, kames are essentially like mounds of sediment, glacial sediments. A kettle pond is something I introduced to you at a place called Stages Pond, which had a large example of a kettle lake. And kettle ponds or kettle lakes are ponds, natural ponds, that are formed in depressions where a large chunk of ice basically sat, might have broken off and took longer to melt, and formed a large, weighed down the ground, formed a depression, and initially filled that depression with water, glacial meltwater, and they remain as ponds or lakes today, if they haven't been altered in any way. So there is a small kettle pond here somewhere. I'll see if we can see it. But before I get to that, I want to show you another species. Interestingly, this is one I showed you at Stages Pond as well, which is in central Ohio. This is shingle oak. This is our only oak, in Ohio at least, that does not have lobes on its leaves. Okay, they make a nice shiny leaf. These are all still expanding. They'll get darker green with time. They almost look like a laurel. But that is shingle oak, which is a native oak species, distinguished by the fact that it makes leaves that are not lobed. So most people would look at those leaves and not recognize this tree as an oak tree, but indeed it is. Okay. All right, I'm going to pause for a minute while I get my bearings and see if I can see where this kettle pond is and if we can view it. All right, I just had walked across the main Esker here, but this area in front of me, 150 feet in front of me there, they call the West Esker. So you can see that landform. And then the kames are up in the distance in the direction that we just had come from. They're kind of shrouded by trees and vegetation, so you can't really see them, but they just would be like mounds, sort of like large Indian mounds. But they're in that direction. Now the kettle pond is behind us, so I will go searching for that as I realize there's a deer fly walking on my camera. There you go, full view. Those things are buggers, so I need to keep moving. I didn't realize this spot would turn out to be so great for trees, but here's a nice, beautiful example of a silver maple. So silver maples were planted everywhere in developments in the 40s and 50s and 60s because they were cheap, fast growing. They more or less replaced American elms after American elms largely died. And they ended up growing into kind of junky trees that a lot of people are trying to deal with now, okay, in urban, suburban settings. But here's a really nice native silver maple, just in beautiful shape. That thing's required no maintenance in its life. No tree topping has had to occur on this tree like they like to do with silver maples. That's about, again, a 2.5 foot diameter tree, just in beautiful shape. And they do adopt this vase-like shape that American elms were often known for, large American elms. You can see that in this tree here. And that's often been replicated in urban, suburban areas to replace the look of American elms, which is nice. But again, they've often been mismanaged and in urban, suburban settings. So that's just a nice, beautiful native silver maple. Again, a tree that's associated with wetlands and wet soils. Okay, now we're going to head up the other side of the main Esker. And I see it's another just sort of Sherwood forest of trees. It's awesome. These bur oaks. Maybe I haven't even seen the largest tree here yet. Okay, there's a number of large bur oaks with this really thick, blocky bark. Look at this thing. Okay, look at that bark. Okay, they're tough. All right. There's some huge ones in front of me. Look at that. Look at those nice, gnarly, curved branches. Awesome. That actually may be the largest tree there. If I can, I'll get a measurement, but I think it's also protected by poison ivy. Yeah, as most of them are. It's a big one. Obviously leaning. I love these things. Those are old trees, a couple hundred years old at least. That's a big one. Yeah. Beautiful sentinels. This preserve was dedicated in the late 70s. I think it was 1977. But obviously those monsters, those giants, have been here for quite some time. All right, it's always nice to see. And now they're preserved, okay, in perpetuity. All right, let's take a break for the herbs, the forbs. Here's a columbine. All right, nice spring wildflower. There are garden varieties as well. The garden varieties, garden columbine, are purple or lavender. So this is our native columbine. And I've been seeing these scattered all along the way here. Okay. Now, I've been seeing this scattered along the way as well. This, unfortunately, is a non-native plant. This is called Dame's Rocket. Four-petaled flowers, which in past episodes I've mentioned is an indicator of a plant in the mustard family. So this is a non-native plant, again, brought here as an ornamental, and it is ornamental indeed, but it's spread all throughout natural areas. I see it all throughout here, and it doesn't really belong here. Now, I notice that people have not gotten as mad at this plant as they do with something like garlic mustard. Okay, this plant tends to not penetrate deeper forest understories as well as garlic mustard does. It needs more light. This is kind of an open canopy site, and so it can thrive. You see it thriving along roadsides quite a bit, semi-shade, semi-sun. But indeed, it actually shouldn't be here. It's always a conundrum though, because earlier I just saw a tiger swallowtail getting nectar from this plant. So it does provide some ecosystem services, even though it doesn't really belong here. So it is a conundrum. All right, onward. Well, here's a giant that unfortunately finally met its end. This one hit the ground, it looks like this year, and this was a true giant. This indeed might have been the largest tree in the preserve. This was a bur oak, and I can't get my tape around this thing, but this thing is giant. This is one of the larger bur oaks I've probably ever seen. I really am sorry I didn't see it standing. I see a few branches of it are still alive there that have leafed out with green leaves, suggesting that there may be a few live roots still attached here, but I don't know how long that'll last. But boy, that was a monster. That's a 5-foot diameter tree at least. Okay. All right, let's keep going. It blocked my trail as well. I came back to revisit those huge hickories, which are bitternut and I believe pignut side by side there, and there's another bitternut right there. But I am at the end of the Esker where you can see the cane. I was here already, but straight in front of us is a mound-like structure that represents just sort of a one-spot deposit of glacial sediments, and that's a kame, K-A-M-E. There's a couple of them there. They're kind of obscured by vegetation. But basically at this point, I'm just gonna make my way back out of here and see if I can get a view of the kettle pond on the way back. All right, so so far so good. And if we can see that, that'll really just make the whole day. In front of me, I see a groundhog down the path, and it's carrying something. It's carrying one of its babies, I believe. See how close I can get to this. Okay, it was carrying one of its babies in its mouth, and its little baby is now chasing mom. I have no idea if you saw that on camera, but I can still see the baby. And the mother was carrying it. I hear it going up onto the Esker. Let's see, it was right in about here. Okay, I've lost him, but it came out of this brush carrying a baby in its mouth and lumbered down the trail here for a ways until it saw me, and then it took off. So that's pretty cool. I've never seen a mama groundhog carrying its baby before. So there you go. I'm on my way back to the car, and just to point it out to you, if you look to your left as you were to enter this preserve, oh, what a beautiful sky out there. The Kettle Pond is sort of nestled in between these trees in this little woodland over here. It doesn't appear to be accessible via the preserve at all. It's a little separate entity, but that's where the Kettle Pond would be. You can kind of see there is a depression there in the landform, and so that's where it lies. And with that, I'd kind of indicate that would be nice to visit this preserve both now, because it's beautiful, but also in the wintertime when all the leaves are gone. So you can really see these geological features. Okay, at Siegenthaler-Kaestner Esker Preserve. Beautiful spot. This is my first time. It's on a beautiful day. So with that, that'll be the Naturalist signing off for today. I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.